Proceed. I'll call the meeting to order and please call the roll.
Okay, well, with that roll call, we will start with our President Deere.
Here.
And we will go to our Vice President Houston.
Here.
And our Treasurer Alvarez.
Here.
Our Secretary Gray. I believe she is not available. Our Secretary is actually with the delegation meeting with our State Governor Newsom. So with that, Godspeed and all that she's doing on behalf of our jurisdictions. And so that takes us to our immediate past president, Director Williams.
I'm here.
All right, I think we do have a quorum. Back to you, President Deere.
Okay, thank you. I'm doing two things at once here. I'm trying to drink a cup of coffee.
And not a problem. And so if I may, on your behalf, public comment, my board secretary has indicated that we do not have public comment, although I do see a hand is raised on the platform here. So if I may ask for my board secretary's assistance with identifying the person who has a hand raised. Looks like it's Lou Vargas, perhaps?
That's correct.
Okay, so if you could orchestrate that public comment.
3 minutes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And thank you for allowing me to give a comment to the board. So first, I would like to comment on the proposed budget. First, I want to add that the city of Manhattan Beach relies on 96% of its supplies from imported water. And currently, the city is going into public notification under Prop 218 to increase water rates. And the water rate projection model that we use the previously forecast rates of 3 to 5%. The city understands the West Basin costs have increased. However, we respectfully request that West Basin look for ways to reduce costs and not to increase rates higher than previously forecast 3 to 5%. In addition, I would like to request to get the customer agency workshop presentation 1 week before the presentation to have time to review the proposed budget. Also, if I can get an email, the notifications of West Basin meetings, since I need to constantly check West Basin website to add the meetings to my schedule. This will help me to plan my attendance to these meetings. And finally, I just have one question. And my question is if West Basin is required to follow Prop 218. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you for those questions. And so that, I believe, concludes our requested public comments on the platform. I see no additional hands raised. And so that takes us back to our President Deere. And if you like, I could continue on with the agenda on your behalf if you like.
Well, yes. So there are no presentations and no action counter items. Is that correct?
That is correct, President Deere. And so that would take us to our information calendar with the single item that we have, which is item A, Capital Improvement Program Fiscal Year 2022-23 budget. And we have a presentation on that item today.
Fine. Please be my guest.
Okay, fantastic. And we have our Executive Manager of Engineering and Operations, Barkev Mezerlian. And before I hand it over to Barkev, I just would like to make a few remarks just by starting with a thank you to Barkev and Wendell and the Engineering and Operations team for putting together today's presentation, in addition to the work that has been done leading up to this moment with all of the budget workshops that have been orchestrated by our Executive Manager of Finance, Margaret Moja, to really have an engaging process with the Board of Directors. Today's workshop specifically is focused on our CIP and the projects that entails. And so part of today's presentation will walk through kind of how do we derive our program as far as the CIP. the dollars that we're looking at in terms of a forecast, both fiscal year based as well as multi-year expenditure plan. And then lastly, the projects that are being highlighted, for within the context of that fiscal year budget and the 5-year multi-year expenditure plan. But beyond that, my remarks are more on the idea that this has been an engaged process. It's allowed for robust discussion among the board and with staff. And when we think about where the district has been in prior years, it's been focused on significant investments in capital to establish a very innovative water recycling program. So establishing facilities, expanding a network to connect to customers, providing 5 different water qualities to meet the needs of our refineries, of our groundwater basin in terms of protecting our aquifers, as well as our tertiary supplies that allow for non-potable reuse of recycled water. And this program has been recognized globally for its innovation and leadership. But today, we're kind of looking at a pivotal juncture as we need to decide what our strategy is going forward, and hopefully today's discussion and the continuing engagement with the board will help us really think through what is our strategy as we look at the need to reinvest in existing infrastructure to make sure we're meeting service levels to our customers, that we're able to provide the appropriate water quality going forward, but also as we envision additional partnerships and perhaps development of additional regional supplies to maximize sustainability for the region. So with that said, some of the concerns that we're wrestling with is how do we fund the CIP that we are proposing, $58 million for the fiscal year alone, which fortunately has some benefit of external funding by about a third, as well as low interest loans that we've been able to secure. So roughly about a half of that 58 million is supported in that manner. But when we look at a 5-year forecast, the reinvestment that we're anticipating in order to meet service levels, in order to meet water quality requirements, is approaching 160 million. And so with that said, Barkev and Wendell will be providing a really good presentation, as I mentioned, and I hope that continues to extend on the robust discussions that we've had to date. So with that, I want to hand it off to Barkev and Wendell.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, President Deere, board members. We are excited about this discussion today about the CIP program and the CIP program budget for next fiscal year and the projection for the next 5 years, as Greg indicated. The CIP budget was developed based on an approach to implement projects proactively to achieve, to maintain the quality, the quantity, the level of service to our customers, and continue our path towards reducing reliance on imported water. The significant effort was put in this year to prepare supplemental documents. So I'm going to start off by indicating that around packet page 95, 96, you'll see tables that we're going to refer to, table A, B, and C. Those tables have more detailed information about the cost of each project per year. Also, starting from package page 100 going up, are detailed spreadsheets for each of the projects, including the drivers, past board approvals, so on and so forth. With that said, we'll go ahead and start our presentation. There's a lot to cover. Presentation might take about 40 minutes. Apologize for that. But on the agenda today, if you can turn to packet page number 10, we'll start off with a little bit of an introduction about the CIP program. What is a CIP? What is the capital projects? What are the type of expenditures for our CIP projects and annual replacements? What drives the CIP project and how do we prioritize them? And then we'll get into the numbers. So what is the proposed budget for next year? How does that relate to the to the budget over 5 years and in total. If we were to commit to a particular project, what does it mean as a whole for the district? And then we'll talk about how we are proposing to fund the projects, and not only what are the sources, but what is our typical strategy towards determining the funding sources. Towards the end, we'll give an overview of the projects included in next fiscal year and open it up at the end for discussion amongst us. If the board members at the end want to talk about a particular project, what are the drivers for these projects, and have some questions about them, we have engineering and operations senior staff also included in here to go as detailed as we need to be on any of the projects that are included. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our manager of engineering, Mr. Wendell Johnson, to head off the presentation.
Thank you, Barkat, and good afternoon. I'd like to first start off with what is a capital improvement program?
Wendell?
Okay, Wendell, if we could hold on, we have a question from Director Alvarez, President Deere. We have a question from.
Go ahead.
Please.
So there is an awful lot of information that was sent and an incredible amount to digest. What is the purpose of today's meeting? Just to present information?
Correct.
And it is for potential CIP.
Correct.
For us to consider as we move forward.
This is an item for the board's consideration.
This is not something that we're being given to say, this is what we want approved.
We do have a list of projects that we are proposing for approval. And today is where we present these projects.
One of the things I noted is most of the projects on the list that I saw had an opportunity to review a little bit last night, have really not been thoroughly vetted at the E&O committee anyways. So anyways, with that, go ahead, Wendell.
And excuse me, we do have another question, Director, President Deere. We have a question from Director Williams.
Okay, go ahead, Errol.
I just want to say that I'm having difficulty hearing Director Alvarez.
I took my mask off too.
Well, you're going to have to do more. I don't know that maybe it's me. I'm also having trouble reading some of this stuff too because it's too small. But this could be my age. But anyway, I'm having difficulty. No, I can hear you. So,
let me adjust the volume to see if that helps without getting too much feedback.
All right, thank you. There's nothing, no, I'm not saying that you're not communicating, but I just can't hear you.
If I speak louder, basically?
That would help, yeah.
Okay.
Use your
project in the future.
Use your outdoor voice.
Okay, very good. So without further ado, we will hand it to Mr. Johnson to continue with his presentation.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to first start off my presentation with, what is the capital improvement program? We should be on packet page number 12 in your presentation. And what is a capital improvement program? It's a blueprint for improving or sustaining an agency's infrastructure. That's developed based on agency commitments, strategic goals, operational demands, agency priority, and funding strategy. The capital improvement program includes budget items for prioritized capital projects, capital asset refurbishment and replacement. Next slide, please. What is a capital project? Okay, a capital project is a long-term, capital-intense investment with the purpose to build upon, add to, or improve capital assets. And capital assets are defined in West Basin's administrative code as land, improvements to land, easements, buildings, building improvements, vehicles, machinery, equipment, works of art, and historical treasures, infrastructures, and all other tangible and intangible assets that are used in operations and can be initial life, useful life, extending beyond 3 years. And I'd like to preface this with what is not a capital project.
Excuse me, Wendell, before you go any further, I know that you have the 6-foot distancing, but we're having a hard time recording and hearing you on the recording. Is it possible for you to remove your mask or scoot down a seat so that we
Absolutely.
can hear you clearly on the videotape?
Okay, thank you for that, Julie. Okay, I'd like to also preface what is not a capital project. And what is not a capital project is anything that is a repair to an existing facility. For example, if we were to have a water main break, that's not a capital project. But on that same water main, if we were going in there to remove and replace a valve that has been in service for a long time that no longer functions, that would be considered a capital project. So certainly new infrastructure improvements are capital projects. Extension of the useful life is a capital project. Increase in capacity is a capital project. Refurbishment and replacement of capital assets are capital budget expenditures. Next page, please. Drivers. What determines a capital project? The district strategic goals, contractual obligation, environmental, safety and compliance, post-emergency recovery, and asset management for equipment that is at the end of its useful life. Next slide, please. How did we identify the projects that are in this proposed plan? It came from operational demands, requests from the district's operations, administration department, and IT department, as well as the district's asset management program. In addition to those sources of capital projects, we have a series of capital reports and studies, which include the Capital Implementation Master Plan of 2006, R&R Program Development Study of 2009, Recycled Water Master Plan of 2021, and other feasibility and condition assessment reports, like, for example, we did a condition assessment and feasibility study on the solids handling portion of ECL, our main recycled water plant. Next slide. You should be on page 16 in your packet. So, expenditures. What are the expenditures in a capital improvement program? Okay. And typically, the expenditure in a capital improvement program includes expenditures for planning, design, bidding, construction, closing out the project, and completing. And some of the steps and some of these phases are, for example, in the planning phase, defining a good scope, doing a feasibility study, determining funding and agreement. In some cases, some of our capital projects are funded by outside sources, which could include our customer base that's out there or the end user of it. In addition to in the design phase, we generally or sometimes have a preliminary design report so that everything is vetted that will be going into the project. Certainly the plan specification and cost estimate is a key component of the design phase of the project. Next slide, please. We get into the procurement and the bidding portion of a typical capital project, which includes advertising for contractors, receiving bids, awarding a contract, and then we move into the construction of the project, which includes the mobilization, material testing, permits, as well as the construction management and contract administrative portion of the project. Next slide, please. And finally, when the project nears completion or is almost complete, we have the closeout phase of a capital project, which is the delivery of the project, as-built documentation, manuals, and other deliverables. Other deliverables may include some spare parts that are involved in the asset that's being turned over to operation. And a project is finally complete, it goes into the warranty phase of the project, and a notice of completion is filed for the project. Next slide, please. Annual capital asset refurbishment and replacement projects are different than capital projects. And refurbishment and replacement projects that are annual here at the district include membrane replacement, equipment for the compliance lab, facility R&R. These are replacement of valves, pumps, and motors that can be handled by operations and doesn't warrant a full-scale capital project for it, as well as ongoing projects at the DLD building and IT project replacement and upgrade of computer type equipment for the district. Next slide, please. How do we prioritize these projects? Okay, and we should be on page 22 in the packet. Capital projects here, as West Basin historically has been in three major areas. Okay, new infrastructure, which is treatment assets. Okay, customer development and pipelines and laterals are part of new infrastructure type projects, and that has largely historically been the area of expansion of bringing an alternative water resource to the community. Currently, this new program, you'll see that there's quite a bit of rehabilitation and replacement type projects, simply because the infrastructure that has been created over the almost last 3 decades are approaching its useful life, and it needs rehabilitation and or replacement. In addition, in that category, we have annual capital assets that are refurbished and replaced. I talked about that briefly in the last slide when we talked about membrane replacement. And in the category of other capital projects that do not involve process or delivery of water to our customer, we have annual headquarter building projects, annual IT projects, and water supply reliability. Most notably, in the past, the district was engaged in feasibility of desalination. Next slide, please. So we have this list of projects, and how do we prioritize it? Okay, and essentially what we've done in this proposed 22-23 CIP plan, we have taken a look at the projects that were underway, which were previously authorized by the board. We looked at the contractual obligations from third-party agreements. We talked with operations and the operator here at the facility and looked at what top issues that the district is having on a day-to-day operation. We used the master planning document to produce this list of projects, and we also have received directives from the board. Next slide, please. Taking all of this in consideration, and when we went into our master planning, this is the criteria we took a look at when we started to prioritize projects. And essentially, we looked at, criteria around safety, the ability to reduce, immediately identify safety risks to the public and employees. Customer experience was largely weighted when it improves water quality for the customer, delivery, pressure, storage, surge protection, stuff of that nature. Additionally, criteria include reliability, compliance, and stewardship, schedule, as well as ability to create cost savings in the operations of our plants and facilities. Next slide, please. You take all that information and what is being produced here, and this is part of your attachment in attachment B, and I believe it begins on, the table is on page 96, but this is what we have as a proposed list of prioritized projects for the fiscal year 22-23. In this list, you can see that we have some main categories of new treatment assets and infrastructure. We have customer development and pipelines and lateral, about 9 projects total in those 2 categories. The remaining projects are in R&R, refurbishment and replacement, as well as other projects that are not considered part of production of water or delivery of water. Next slide, please. So I have a priority list of projects, and table A is a proposed 5-year CIP project list. Essentially, these projects start out in year 22-23 or have already been underway. And this 5-year CIP shows you the impact of starting a project. Most, if not all, of our capital projects that are not annual require more than 1 year to get through the new number of phases involved of getting a project from a design concept to actual construction and through it. There are 46 budgetary line items in table A, 37 capital projects, and 9 capital asset refurbishment or replacement type projects. Table B are anticipated 5-year CIP projects. Okay, these are projects that are not underway. They are not slated to start in fiscal year 22-23, but are expected to start maybe in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th year of the 5-year CIP. So they need to be accounted for somewhere. And table C is the other potential CIP project. These are large-scale projects that the district would not undertake unless there is a substantial outside funding source that is brought in from either the state level or the federal government. And so these projects are unlikely to proceed ahead doing this 5-year projection that we have. And these tables, table A is included on 96 in your packet, table B is on 97, and table C is on page 98. Next slide, please. At this time, I'd like to reintroduce Barkev, and he will give you information about the budget.
Thank you, Wendell. As we said earlier, we're going to start getting into the numbers in the next few slides. First, we're going to start off talking about the numbers, the dollar amount for the next fiscal year, and the list of proposed projects. And those are, again, the projects that are either underway, they're in design, they're in construction, some planning work has done on them, or they have been prioritized to start in the next fiscal year based on the agreements that we have or otherwise. And then we're going to go into the 5-year expenditures of those same projects. So first, what they are for the next fiscal year, then how do those same projects translate into a dollar amount over the next 5 years? And to add to that, the anticipated projects, to see a holistic view of the 5-year CIP, what the 5-year CIP could be, we've added the projects that would potentially not start next year, but could start in year 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so that would be the full 5-year CIP program. That would be the combination of table A and table B. So we'll start off with packet page 29. And that is the proposed budget, CIP budget for next fiscal year alone is $57.9 million approximately. This pie chart here shows how the breakdown of that value goes within the categories. The new infrastructure for treatment assets is $19.5 million. Pipelines and laterals, $11.4 million. R&R is about $25.8 million. And then the other category is estimated at $1.2 million. And as Greg mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, out of this $57.9 million, 19 million, that is 33%, is either coming from grant or customer funding. 33%. Another 17% is coming in from state loan proceeds. So state loan proceeds, customer funding, external grant funding combined together is 50% of the $57.9 million for next fiscal year. To take a look at this further, on packet page 30, if we were to look at what are the major contributors to this budget, you'll see that there are two projects that account for 45% of the budget. And that's the phase 2 expansion project that currently is in construction. The estimated expenditures for that project for the next fiscal year is $16.6 million. And then the PV recycled water lateral or recycled water pipeline that is anticipated to go into construction this summer, another $9.3 million. So those two projects account for 45%. The R&R type of projects account for another 45%. Those are 28 capital projects and 4 annual budgets for capitalized expenditures. So what remains, if we take out the 45 and the 45%, what remains is a 10% of $6.2 million. Where are those coming from? One, a converted filter booster pump station. Those are the pumping facilities for our filtration system that supports the Title 22 system and therefore supports the satellite plants that are pumping facilities to restore capacity that is hydraulically not there at this point.
President Deere, just a clarification in another point. Can we, because this presentation has an awful lot of material, can we ask questions as the presentation goes along, or are we going to wait till the very end?
Well, if you're not going to ask a lot of questions, you can interrupt them. But if you're going to have a lot of questions, wait till the end. I'll let you decide.
It's easier to interrupt and ask the questions as we go along.
It is, yes.
So on this particular issue, there are two projects that have been basically approved and are underway, and that is the Melinda McDonald Phase 2 expansion and the Palos Verdes recycled water project. On the R&R capital projects, I don't believe all of those have been reviewed and deemed to be absolutely necessary. So are we going to be able to see a breakdown of that, or is that just the reference that was made earlier to the list of projects that were in pages 91, 92, or 93, or wherever the pages were?
Director Albert, we're prepared to discuss the projects and discuss whether a project had a prior approval for a design phase or a construction phase or something to that nature, or doesn't have one yet. And we'll be prepared to discuss that towards the end in an open discussion.
Okay.
And then the last category is projects that come from where?
The non-water conveying projects.
We can discuss those as well. We can discuss the whole list of projects. So those are, again, some projects have already started, others that haven't. And we'll be prepared to answer any questions of those as well. Some have already been discussed as part of the E&O committee updates. Others haven't, while you have been here, Director Alvarez, over the year and a half, but perhaps have been discussed prior to that. But we're happy to have that conversation again.
Go ahead.
So the 10% we talked about convert filter booster pump station That's in construction. Inglewood Disinfection Station, we had done some work on this in prior years. However, the site was taken away, was no longer available. This is to address some of the water quality issues in the city of Inglewood during the winter time when there's low flows in our system. 5 pipeline extension projects. There are a couple of there on there that we're not going to include this year, but we added it in the last minute because Army Corps funding was approved for the North Gardena pipeline and the Mills Park pipeline in the city of Carson. And there are a couple in there. There's going to be full reimbursement by developers, like the pipeline that goes through the Chargers facility or the pipeline that goes towards the Clippers facility. Also, and then there's the replacements that are related to the headquarters building and IT implementations. So if we were to take these same projects and look, okay, what do these projects cost exactly over the 5 years? They cost around $157 million. And there is another number that's associated with this. We've already spent some money on some of these projects in the past. For example, Carson Phase 2 projects, we did pilot studies, we did planning studies, feasibility studies, a lot what had been spent before we went into design and then into construction. So of this 157 million, that's the next 5 years. If we were to take what we spent in the past on these projects, close to $30 million. Then comes $157 million over the next 5 years. And then associated with these projects, you can go beyond the 5 years and say there's still some expenditures associated with these projects, like the DCS replacement program that we have over 10 years for the replacements. So if we were to take the past, the present, and the future, it amounts to $214 million just related to these projects. And you can see over the 5 years, this is a graphical representation on packet page 32 of the different categories that we have. That yes, there is some new infrastructure in the next fiscal year that's largely related to the Phase 2 expansion and the PV lateral. But you can see that the dark blue is largely based on R&R type of projects geared towards, again, maintaining operations, maintaining level of service, and maintaining compliance. Now on packet page 33, this is where we're looking at the Table A project, the proposed projects, but we're also adding in anticipated projects that could start in year 2, 3, 4, and 5, which amount to another $73.9 million. So if we were to combine the 157 and add the 73.9, you're looking at a full projection, a 5-year projection of $230 million over the next 5 years. And as you can see in the next slide on packet page 34, again, the big emphasis is on R&R projects. So we're not even considering major new infrastructure implementations here. With that said, it's time for us to talk about how we're going to pay for these. And what are the strategies that West Basin implements in looking at the funding. So I'll introduce the Executive Manager of Finance, Ms. Margaret Moja, to take those slides. Margaret?
Yes, good afternoon, directors and guests. Yes, I'm here to talk about the funding sources here, and if we can turn to the next page, page 36 of your packet. So funding sources available to West Basin and to public agencies come in a variety of forms, and as listed on here, we can go through them here. So first of all, you've got your Pago. Pago funding are for those that are, are generated from current revenue. So as we set our rates, part of that setting of the rates does go towards paying for some of these projects. And those projects, typically are shorter in nature, and so, it makes sense to use current revenues to be able to pay for those types of items. Going on to the second category, you have external funding. Again, we have been very fortunate. You've already heard it mentioned earlier in this presentation. We've been very successful with 2 of our projects, for this next year, covering over 50% of our CIP expenditures from third-party funding, either from grants, from customers that have been able to really support us in this particular effort. We've also worked with our own customers that we're working with. We've got some capital funding that comes in as fixed payments to us, and so that has helped us, to offset some of the costs that goes towards these projects. The third category you have here is your government grants and loans. And again, we were very fortunate to be able to secure a low interest loan from the State Revolving Fund from the State Water Resources Control Board for both the 2 projects that are identified, both the Phase 2 project as well as the PV lateral. And so again, that has really helped us offset those costs there and make these costs be able to move forward on these projects with that additional funding. And then finally, what's available to us is if we don't have, enough funding coming from a third-party source or enough money being generated from our revenues, we could go out into the public market, either on a short-term or a long-term basis, to be able to, secure debt financing to be able to do that. And that has been historically the process that West Basin has used to do many of its initial phases, from Phase 1 back in the early 90s all the way up through Phase 5, where we were able to secure funding in, up through 2012. So with that, I ask us to go to the next slide, please. So some of the considerations for capital project funding strategies, certainly as the district goes along here, and as we evaluate sort of, I'll say, the shift from being an expansion mode to more of an R&R mode, certainly we will want to have a conversation around how do we fund these capital projects. We want to make sure we understand the useful life of those projects so that we can understand if it's better to use Pago fundings, meaning do we generate that revenue through the increase of our rates to be able to do so, or is it something that we will see that debt financing is more appropriate? Of course, I think the first thing after we do that is understanding that useful life. Do we need the project? What is the timing of the project, and what is that useful life of that project? It's really making sure where we can access, that external funding. Again, we are very fortunate, to be working with the Army Corps of Engineers. We've been very successful in the past with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to be able to get some significant funding to be able to support these projects. But on a go-forward basis, we have some opportunities through the infrastructure bill that is currently out there. But again, where is that available to us? Most of our projects, as you know, or as you've just heard, is through the R&R, and so we will be looking at where we can make that happen. And certainly working with our customers is a good way to be able to do so. And then finally, just really trying to make sure that we have that sort of the right balance there, because certainly we could raise rates in order to pay for that project, but is that too much in one year? Can we balance that over a period of time? And so finding that balance between Pago and external funding, or I'm sorry, financing, is an important thing with our new infrastructure and our R&R projects. So typically the internal practice has been that with your shorter useful life, those are better candidates for Pago funding. So IT projects, membrane replacements, again, very good use of, if you will, of Pago funding. Those are sort of known items that we can certainly gear ourselves to. But we also, as you heard earlier, report that some of our infrastructure, our capital investment are reaching their end of the useful life. And so what do we do to be able to maintain the integrity of those assets? And so, these are something that we would have to do a replacement or an upgrade to be able to extend that useful life or to increase that service as Wendell had outlined in his discussion points. And so those assets that are greater than 20 years useful life is a good candidate for debt financing. And we do have a number of projects that are on the list that do that. And so we work very closely with our engineering team to really get a very good handle of what the projects are, outside of the fact of, are we moving forward with this project, but knowing that if this is the list that I'm provided, how would I respond, and making a recommendation to not only to the management team here, but to the board of directors. So with that, I ask you to go to the next slide. And now we're on page 38 of your presentation. So on the debt financing side, again, two ways for us to be able to do it. One on the short-term basis and then on a long-term basis. So on our short-term basis, the district does have in place a commercial paper program in which we're able to sort of just in time be able to access the market on that. Commercial paper has certainly risen in the recent months with the market conditions as they are, around a 1% sort of funding there. I think when we were utilizing the commercial paper, it was, I think less than 20 basis points. So a much different sort of environment that's there, but still a very attractive price, if you will. And certainly as we are looking at these projects, there are good ways for us to be able to do that. But there is flexibility in how we repay that commercial paper. There are a number of ways you can be able to do that. One is that, for instance, on these projects that we have here that are sort of bigger in nature, we could actually go and use our commercial paper if we didn't have enough in our savings account, if you will, to be able to do that. And then as those grant fundings come in, we can then use those grant fundings to be able to pay that back. So just, timing, if you will, relating to some of those projects. We can also repay a portion of those projects if we say, hey, we got some extra money here, we had a good year, on sales or something like that, and we can use that to pay that back. Or we can also then take a look at, perhaps refunding them on a long-term basis. And again, looking at that timing associated with that. And of course, the underlying asset that we use that commercial paper for, making sure that it is for that long-term asset so that it makes sense from a tax basis to be able to say that we can get long-term debt associated with it. And on long-term debt, again, we can structure that debt so that it meets our overall debt management strategy. The district does have debt, between now and 2041, but it does drop down in 2030, again, and down in 2032, and then also down in 2037. So if we have some, projects that are, on that long-term basis, be it the ones that are being discussed today or some future projects, we can then structure our financing so that we stay in sort of on a level debt service. And that's really what we try to achieve working with our financial team of our financial advisors and bond counsel. And then also too, the long-term debt has been very beneficial to us when we are able to identify new revenues. And that is why it's been in the district strategy in the past to go in each of those phases when we were increasing our production with, either the barrier or the refineries or even to our Title 22 customers. We've identified new revenues and we're able to demonstrate to, our investors, to the credit rating agents, to our board, that we are able to find those revenues to be able to offset the cost of debt financing. So if I can ask you to go to the next page. Some additional considerations for us to do is, again, if we do decide to, pivot away from using debt financing for some of these projects, understood that we have R&R projects on hand, and how should we fund that? That is a shift for us, and we haven't always been in the place to be able to, have as much R&R. Over the years, we've had, much smaller numbers, in the area of our R&R expenditures, but you can see that they've become much more significant in recent years. And again, because they are much more significant as far as project goes. And so we can, like I said, pivot and use Pago or reserves to be able to do so for these long-term assets. But that is a strategy that we will need to work with the board and able to sort of how do we make that happen? Because again, we have our ongoing operational costs that we're trying to do. We're maintaining, ensuring that we're making payments on our current debt portfolio. And so we want to make sure that we are balancing, if you will, the decisions of not just the 1 year, but the multi-year around these items. So again, if we use Pago to pay for these projects, it may result that in future years, you're going to have higher rate increases and able to pay for some of those short-term assets. So it's sort of, again, you use the dollars to pay for long, but now in the future years, you need it for the short-term assets. You can't go issue debt for it. So therefore, how do you need to do it? If you need to do those projects, you're going to need to raise rates. So we want to make sure that we're very keen on sort of understanding these projects. And again, very tough questions are given to our engineering team to really understand the full scope of sort of timing and useful lives of our projects. The second bullet point there, the intergenerational equity, is again taking into consideration the fact that if these are long-term assets, that these assets are one in which the users of those assets are going to be paying future revenues, and that future revenues, one of those costs to be able to do that is to be able to debt finance this, and they could actually be supporting us here. So it would help us to stay away from sort of having spikes, if you will, in our rates, if you will, on an any given year. But again, the last thing I want to say is that we want to make sure that we're taking a long-term view of balancing the use of our reserves. We might hear me say designated funds, but use of our reserves and debt financing, because it's not just about a 1 year. As you can see, Mark has laid out a 5-year plan, not just on the projects that are here, but just the projects that could be coming into the future. And understanding that lens, if you will, really gives us a good point to make some important decisions here for the district. And with that, it takes you to the next slide. So as Barkev said, we have shared these slides with you previously at last week's April 13th workshop, where again, taking the same numbers that you saw that Barkev presented earlier, what is it by fiscal year, and what is it by the types of categories that that Barkev has laid out. And so you can see the expenditures there. And again, as already stated, a good portion of those expenditures are coming from R&R, and so we will need to be very mindful of how to ensure that we're meeting the contractual requirements, making sure that we meet to the integrity of our system, so that we can make sure that we are able to produce this recycled water that is using these funds here. Next slide, please. And this slide was also shared with you at last week's budget workshop. This has to do with how do we anticipate doing that. And so this, again, sort of states in numbers, if you will, where do we anticipate spending our dollars, or how are we getting those dollars to pay for those dollars in the capital budget. Again, $9.8 million coming from grants, another $9 million or so coming from our customer agencies. We've got a state loan, also about $9 million, and the balance coming from Pago and financing. And again, the discussion about how much is Pago, how much is financing, while we have some internal discussion about that, we will be discussing that in greater detail at next week's workshop regarding our long-range financial plan. But it just gives you a sense of, we want to continue to have this dialogue with the board to understand where do they want to go forward. Do we continue with the pathway that we've had? Do we pivot to a new direction? That is the input we're looking for as we continue to have these conversations. As I see it, this is the beginning of the conversation. There are important decisions ahead of you. Most notably is trying to understand what projects are needed and when they are needed, and then we can address the financing question. And with that, I believe that takes me to the end of my aspect, and I'll turn it back to Wendell and Barkev.
And maybe perhaps before we hand it back to Wendell and Barkev, if the board has any questions that Margaret may immediately respond to.
Apparently there are none.
Okay, great.
Thank you,
So,
President.
Oh, there's one, Director Alvarez.
Margaret, I know you mentioned it is something that will be discussed further. But it's always, and maybe we'll hear more, so I'm probably going to have some follow-up questions. As of today, on the Pago versus financing, that's you throw in that number, it looks like a pretty big number at $30 million.
Right.
Do you have any idea of where we are for this fiscal year in terms of Pago versus financing? Is the majority of that going to be Pago and the majority of that going to be financing?
Yes. Let me just pull it up on my screen because I just updated a slide to reflect that. So of the of the $29 million that you see here on the screen today, the way we've identified it as those that are Pago related versus debt financing, about 18 million of that is coming from Pago funding versus $11 million from using the CP line. And again, those conversations are still need to be had and discussed with the board. And again, we hope to delve into that further next week, but I'm more than happy to have that conversation as well. And just to let you know, when we were sharing out on last week's presentation as to relates to sort of the overall revenues and expenses, and some of the numbers have changed because we've got new numbers coming in from MET and some other costs coming in from our recycle water operations increasing. We don't, I will say to you that, our net revenues are about 5 million or so. So, while I'm saying 18 million, we're only bringing in about 5 million. So how are we going to make up that difference? Is it going to be commercial paper? Is it going to be a draw on our reserve? And there's, good talks and discussions around, the implications of using our reserves for that. Is it, are these projects necessary at this time? And those are the things that I think that the board will need to take all of these sort of different inputs to be able to then make a sort of a decision going forward. So hopefully that provides you some context there.
A little bit of context. So in terms of Pago, if I just heard you correctly, we only really have about $5 million.
Based off of our proposed budget and our proposed rates and charges, this 5 million, again, we gave some options to the board of a 0 rate increase and a 5% increase. Again, no decision has been made by the board on that, but we have about, based off of a 5% increase, we're bringing in a little over $5 million. So yes, we have 5 million coming in with an $18 million identified Pago slash I'll say reserves, if you will, that could be used.
Okay. And then the other thing is, to me, it's a state loan is still financing. Why do you break out state loans as opposed to financing? They're both loans. One's made by a governmental agency, one's made by a investment, private investment group.
Sure.
So, but in both cases, it requires that it be paid back. And if we look at the last bond refinance that you did, that was almost about at the same rate as state loan. So there isn't much of a difference. But the critical thing is they're both financing mechanism. So why the difference?
Very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. So yes, the state loans are 2 loans that we have already secured. And so we know, that we're paying for the PV lateral, for instance, 0.55% for that $3.9 million loan. And with the phase 2 project, my understanding it's about 1% for that loan. I did only separate it in the context that you see it on your slide here, in that I've grouped, if you will, sort of its district, and then we need to make the decision, is it Pago or financing? So you're absolutely correct. Both are financing because we do have to repay that loan. It's not just here's some money, because we did get some money from the state as well, but that's showing up in that grant line item. So I will say that I was trying to emphasize the district portion, and that there is either coming from Pago or long-term debt, if you will. Sorry, not long-term debt, some kind of debt, if you will. And the decision is how much do we want to do on one or the other? Again, while I say that, hey, I have 18 million in Pago / reserves, some of those projects probably could be funded, because they may be over a 20-year useful life, but because, they were sort of smaller in nature, we're getting towards the end of the project, we were just trying to wrap them up using the current sort of mode, if you will, of what we were paying for those projects. So, yes, you are correct that our state loan proceeds and our own district funding through that, going out into the public market are similar. They, come from 2 different places, 2 different rate structures, if you will, as far as what you may have. And just for sort of context here, right now, if we're looking at the market, it's around 4% or so that, that we could go out and get them, financing for ourselves on a long-term basis. So 1% on a short term, 4% on a long term. And again, we will go into more dialogue next week to say, how do we break down that district portion? Do we really want to do it all on financing? Do we want to do Pago? What's the mix between that? And that's the important discussion to have with you, and we look forward to having that conversation.
Okay, so right now it's 4%, and when you just refinanced, what did you refinance at?
Yeah, so we refinanced at a little under 2%. The market has certainly changed in this last few months. We, I think, got the sweet spot in the market. But yeah, it was a little under 2%. But it was also, I think, shorter on the market too. I think we were only going out about 10 years on the market. And if we were to go out typically for bonds on a, I'll say new transaction, we have usually gone about 25 years or so.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, so that takes us back to Wendell and Barkett.
Next slide, please. So right here, I'd like to introduce the projects and the various phases that the projects are in. Under the bidding and construction phase, these are projects that were approved in prior year budgets by the board to move forward with these projects. And these projects are either under construction or they are in the bidding phase. On your right hand side of this table, as you're looking at it, the last column is the total project cost, and the column next to that is the expenditures or expected expenditures for fiscal year 22-23. And so these projects here have been previously approved by the board and are included in this budget years, the fiscal year budget 22-23 as a line item. And to go over a few of them, of course, we have the largest project the district has done, and sometimes the phase 2 expansion at J&M Carson project is part of this group of $21 million worth of projects. Next slide, please.
Can we stay on that one a little bit? So that project is under construction now. The JMM phase 2 expansion, right?
Correct.
Then the distribution system cathodic protection, that's underway now.
Correct.
Okay. The Title 22 converted filter booster pump station, that is underway now.
Correct.
The retaining wall and backflow preventer replacement program is a project that we discussed very recently and that is not underway. And if it's to be built at all, it should be something worked out with the Torrance refinery.
Correct.
So that is really a project that we should be looking at funding. The Inglewood Basketball Entertainment Center
This is a developer generated project which is totally reimbursed by the developer in that particular case.
I didn't know about the Blue and the Salter and the MFRO CIP valve replacement. Is that underway right now?
Yes, that's in the procurement phase of the.
Okay. Thank you.
Next slide, please. This list here is a list of projects that are currently under the design phase. Again, on your right-hand side of this table, you have the total project cost. This is past, present, and future project costs. Of course, we have the PV recycled water pipeline project, along with other projects. If you go down to the Nash Street project, that particular project, again, is a developer reimbursement type project that's included on the list. These projects are in the design phase and are expected that we would be going out to bid in the next fiscal year for these projects.
When you say they're in the design phase, are all of these right now currently under design? That is, we have a contract with a consulting firm that's doing the design.
Correct.
For every one of these projects.
Yes. You have design on Nash Street?
Yes, the design on Nash Street, in this particular case, when I'm talking about Nash Street, the contractor or the developer is providing the design. Our team is reviewing to make sure that their design meets the standard of the district. And we will also be inspecting the installation of the project once it gets underway. And again, that timeline and schedule is driven by the contractor in this particular instance. So it's a design phase because we're still reviewing the contracts, but it's expected to go into construction quite rapidly. And largely the costs that you see are for inspection services for the project.
Right, and then with respect to that, when we show the budget, these are budgeted costs for design services or design and construction services?
This is a total project cost, so it's design and construction
No,
services.
but for FY 22-23.
It could be both.
You may have some overlap.
There's could be overlap.
So maybe we can come back, and you don't have that information necessarily today, but what is actually the portion that right now we already have under consulting design services that are already been awarded versus what is potentially construction?
Yeah, we could come back and provide that information.
And in all cases, is it fair to say that any construction dollars would require a board approval before we begin any of those expenditures?
Absolutely right.
Absolutely. Are we ready to go on to the next slide?
Yes.
Next slide, please. These projects, this list of projects, again, and on the right-hand side of the table shows the total cost of the project, which includes all phases of the project. And what you have in the FY 22-23 in these projects is what expenditures we plan to spend in the fiscal year of 22-23. And if the director has any questions about these projects,
So again, the planning phases is just the breakdown, so I understand better what we're looking at. If we're looking to spend money this year, budget money, when you say planning phase, this is just going to be to retain consultants to do planning studies, feasibility studies, or actually go into design.
okay, this would be both under the 22-23 budget. Currently, the project is in the planning phase. That's where it is today. Okay, I know, for instance, if we look at the solids handling improvement project, we will be coming to concluding our planning shortly, and our expectation is that probably the money that you're seeing there is the actual design cost of the project in the next fiscal year.
Okay, so again, it's the same type of question and or comment, however you want to take it, but we would be provided with information then as to what we've actually are already under contract and what we anticipate that's really going to be what we're budgeting money for. Otherwise, we've already committed money.
Right. We'll come back with that information. Next slide, please. And these are the early planning phase projects where, for example, when we take a look at Mills Park and North Gardena, those are core-driven projects where we receive outside funding. What you're seeing in the fiscal year 22-23 for those particular projects are the district share of monies that are being matched by the core. Essentially, the district provides 1/3, 25% of the project total cost of all phases of the project, and the core makes up the 75% of the rest of it. And so what you're seeing here in these dollar values for Mills Park and North Gardena are the district share in order to get the project started. And usually the Corps requires this money upfront before anything begins on the project. So that's why you're seeing those large dollars both in Mills Park and North Gardena on that. Those are-
Okay, so,
And to add to Wendell, this list here, the reason why it's called early planning, some level of evaluation and analysis has been done on these projects, some more than others. Some were put on hold for a while for several reasons, whether it's funding or whether we were supposed to have a piece of land to put the facility on, we don't have it. And so some level of analysis has been done on these projects in the past. And in addition, there are some of the projects in here that are included in our latest funding agreements with two of the refineries. We identified a few R&R projects, and they're also on the list. And those projects we would have to, if we don't proceed with them at some point, we would have to return some of that money that we're getting from them. So, for example, on this list here, the Hyperion R&R project, the Hyperion Forest Merit R&R project, and the DCS replacement, all three of those projects have some refinery funding associated with it.
okay, so of these projects, the majority, some, obviously they've all had some investment. Somebody had to even think about it, it's a staff time.
Scope it out, schedule it. Yep. Yep.
But of these projects, again, the question, these are then net new dollars that we're looking to spend, or some of this money is already committed and there are contracts that are underway that make up some of these dollars.
In this particular case, when I look at the early planning list, these projects, these dollars have not been committed largely, other than when we talk about Mills Park and North Gardena. Most of this work is not under contract, or essentially the dollar value that you see there is for staff time to bring on some of the early planning that needs to be done.
We want to, I think, exception, Wendell, is the DCS, right? We have consultants on that.
Yeah, the DCS, yeah, with exception of the DCS, we've already had expenditures of about a $500,000. But in this figure here, there are no contracts associated with the DCS that's
Okay, so
part of this
on the
budget.
DCS, we have $500,000, but is the contract on the DCS encompassing that 870,000 or not?
No, this is
This
the
is net new.
878,000 is new money.
It's the net new money that to be awarded.
Right,
Correct.
So all of these are net new monies.
new money.
A mix of outsourcing and staff time.
Correct.
Yes.
In terms of the 5.4 million, it's net new money.
Correct.
Let me ask a question.
Go ahead,
President.
Christie. Go ahead, Dick.
Thank you. Just on this same chart, well, a couple of things I'm a little confused, just, So with the Mills Park and North Gardena, I do understand what you're saying. We have to expend a certain amount on our own before the Army Corps apparently will kick in or what have you. But you have here, so you have the budgeted amounts, but then we have the total project cost, which obviously is barely anything more than the budgeted amounts. But those projects are actually more than that, right? I mean, aren't they?
Correct. We don't, in this particular case, we don't show the Army Corps outside funding for those projects as the total project cost, nor do we show it in fiscal year 22-23.
Oh, so
I think that's what Wendell had said earlier, that the 75% contribution is excluded from here.
this only shows our portion for the full term of the project.
Correct.
That makes sense. But I can understand how that would be confusing if you're looking at it.
No, that's a really good question, is when you articulated that, it kind of confused me too.
Right. And then on the DCS, I think Director Alvarez made a good point too, because we're seeing what you guys are basically going to have to authorize this fiscal year, right?
Correct.
And yet we've already spent 500,000 prior,
Correct.
but that was on a previous contract that we had
Correct.
worked, right?
We had consultants on board to prepare an audit to outline the improvements and how it could be phased over the years. And that audit has come to a conclusion, correct? Correct, Wendell?
Correct. There's like 3% left
Yeah.
of those
Okay.
monies.
So I do remember that, but so now we're gonna have another thing coming to us this year for
Next phase, if you will.
next phase, which we anticipate is about 870 some thousand. And obviously the whole project is 29 million, but that includes the 500,000 we've already spent, correct?
Correct.
Plus this and what we anticipate in the future. Okay.
And I do like to, highlight that that's inclusive of staff time as well, right?
All right, one last question I've got. I guess I could see how if a person was looking at this, it'd be kind of hard to understand, what really is happening, unless we're really asking these questions. And then lastly, so the Inglewood disinfection station, which I see, 360,000 is the anticipated budget for this coming fiscal year, right? Obviously, this project's over $2 million. And then I did see that in your estimated, that was part of that 10%. You had in here a little thing about approximately 0.4 million, So that's that. And just to enlighten me for 1 second, so what exactly happened? We lost the potential location and what's going on now?
Yeah, we had to agree with the city to install the disinfection station in the city yard, close to our pipeline. And then that, because of the Clippers development, that option did not was not available anymore.
So you guys are now looking for a new
site. We did prepare design plans for that site in the past, and we're hoping to find a new site where a lot of that design could be used again. It's not that complicated of a facility, so we're hoping to use the same type of design.
And on top of that, we got
Find a new site.
if we find the site, we may have to procure the site or what have you.
Correct. The next step here would be getting a real estate agent on board to see if we can find a site and enter into some sort of a negotiation, procure the site, then install the disinfection station.
And last but not least, so they already did some of the work. So that's not noted here, right? Because this is going forward, the 360. So how much maybe did you spend already on that, if you remember?
I think, don't quote me on this, I think we spent a little over $150,000, if I'm not mistaken.
We have a project sheet on here, on that particular line item?
It's an older project, but it was 2 or 3 years ago, so it's not in here.
But that would technically be in the final
It would be the total project cost.
2.2 million. Okay, got it. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so if there aren't any further questions, perhaps we could continue on to the next page.
Next slide, please. Okay, this table represents the annual capital asset refurbishment and replacement type projects that are listed in the FY 22-23 budget. Again, on the table, in the table, the column on the right is the total project cost, and the column next to that is the budgeted amount or budget request for fiscal year 22-23. A total of $3.4 million worth of the project. Are there any questions on this particular table?
Okay, so on this one, mostly is R&R. What's the ops facility R&R?
The op facility R&R type projects are replacement and refurbishment projects that don't rise to a level of capital project. Essentially, these are costs that our operator provides for our operation department. For example, valve replacements both in our facilities as well as out in the street, along with motors and pumps. So these are items that are easy to identify, that don't require a full-scale set of plans in order to achieve that particular betterment.
Okay, so on these, then, we're just taking a quick look at them. Not 100% of these are necessary.
They have been, these projects have been identified as projects that are necessary to sustain the infrastructure. Are you asking, can the projects be deferred? Is that?
Well, if you don't do them this year and you do them next year, will the world fall apart?
With regards to the membrane replacement, Director Alvarez, there is some refinery funding for those, and they're on a schedule. As we've talked about earlier this year, when the board awarded some money to replace some of the membranes after the incident at Hyperion. So those are on a schedule, and in most cases, the schedule is defined by our agreements with some of the refineries, in most cases. So that's the membrane replacements, that internal plants, and there's some refinery funding for those as well. On the facility R&R, again, those are budgets that are provided by the operator, like Wendell said. For example, most recent one is some check valves that needed to be replaced or leaking. They've been repaired over and over again, and they got to a point where they need to be replaced. So this is our contract operators' best estimate of what the budget would be coming up in the next fiscal year. Same with compliance lab. If we take a look, if there is a particular type of equipment that needs to be replaced, could it wait? Could it be pushed later? How urgent is it needed this next fiscal year? So those type of questions get asked to prepare that type of budget. IT CIP project, again, software implementations, that kind of stuff, server related infrastructure. This year, for example, we installed the videos and some of that type of infrastructure. Regarded as capital assets if they have a 3-year useful life or more. Now, the DLD buildings, this might be what you're referring to, is we have to make a decision on how much we would want to invest in here, and that's probably going to be based on how much we think we're going to be here. How long is it going to take to finish up our services that we talked about earlier today in the F&A committee, the real estate services and the conceptual plans putting together for a potential admin building at ECL. How long is that really going to take? What's the projection for us to be here in DLD? And then once we get that projection, is it worth for us to say, still spend the first one here is a $30,000 for an HVAC unit for our server room. We're on virtual. It has heated up before a determination has made that HVAC unit be replaced. So could that be something that is important for us to keep and make sure that we are operating? I'll come to the elevator in a bit. There's air conditioning units for the building itself has caused some problems. This has been identified by our facility technician here, and photos have been shared in the past. Also, the boiler needs total replacement. So, to the tune of $80,000 there. And last but not least, the elevators. We've talked about this in the past. I think there was some preference not to start on investing that. We know now, even our appraiser said, if you invest in it, put a lot of dollars in this building, it's not really going to add value to it. So that's a determination. Elevators are pretty old. It's a determination that we need to make of whether it's okay for us to go ahead and make these improvements here, knowing that, are we really going to stay here for another 6 months, 4 months, 1 year, 2 years? And if the answer more is towards the latter, then maybe it's prudent for us to make these investments. And that's something for the board also, to chime in and and suggest?
I thought there was a safety factor in terms of the elevators.
Do you have any additional information to share on that note, Barkev, as far as safety factor with the elevator modernization?
There's a couple of issues involved in the elevator. One is the ADA requirement for the elevator to be in compliance for public to attend our board meetings here on the third floor. The biggest issue with the elevator is that the parts are not available, and they're required to be upgraded in order to keep the elevator in a reliability service mode, meaning that the elevator could completely stop or cease operating, or people could possibly get stuck in the elevator from the operation ceasing because the parts are no longer available. So essentially, this is kind of a bare bones approach to what needs to be fixed in order to keep the building functioning for 2 or 3 years. We're not talking about a complete overhaul of the elevator. We're talking about a minor overhaul of the elevator to upgrade the controls in the system that operates, that causes the elevator to travel, causes the elevator to brake, causes the elevator to stop on the levels that it needs to, and certainly remove the noise and the discomfort that occupants experience when they ride the elevator now.
Especially when that rubber band does this.
On the membrane replacement, since that's actually a really big number if you look at the total, we're really talking there about multi-year replacement of the membranes at all 3 facilities.
Correct. Yes.
So maybe we can just get a breakdown of what the fiscal year 22-23 that we're asking for money is.
The breakdown of the 402,000?
Yeah, where are we spending it?
Breakdown of which facility?
What
Go.
money is that for? Because we're always going to be replacing membranes. They have a limited life. Part of the commitment once you go to a membrane type of process that you're either going to replace them every 2 years or every 5 years or whatever that frequency is determined to be. And with respect to that, I know that Wendell, you spoke earlier about what is capital improvement, profit improvement, et cetera. I view that more as a maintenance type of an activity. Once you commit to that, that you should just budget the money and set up, if you will, a reserve fund, build it today. You know you're going to replace it in 5 years. You start setting money aside for it so that in 5 years, when it's going to be replaced, the money is there, since that's part and parcel of that operation, is the replacement. So I'd like to see a further discussion by the board about shifting some of these things from CIP, because when we make a commitment to certain types of facilities, and we should recognize that we're making a commitment to having to set money aside for the operation of that facility. And the replacement of the membranes is going to be as regular an item as the day-to-day tweaking of valves and other operational issues that are handled.
And let me ask just a question or two here. Is the obviously if we approve the numbers that are presented as such, but ultimately it still has to come back to the board for approval along the way of the transactions, right? So even if we were to approve what these numbers say the elevators need or whatever, they'd have to come back to us to decide to pull the trigger, right?
So approval for us would mean for us, we translate that as go ahead and take the next step on this. So on the next step, if it's a next step is a design, we prepare an RFP, we go out to bid, come back, and we come back to the board to say, we went out and did this, here's the next step, and this is how much it's going to cost for design. Similarly for construction. So those are opportunity points for the board to, make the project proceed or not. And we typically like to give the E&O committee, for example, 2 or 3 months a heads up that this is coming, and we're going out to bid.
Right.
On this thing.
Which is where we could prevent that to going out to bid, if need be, right?
Good board's pleasure to provide input.
I think the way we would probably, in some ways, I look at it would be, I understand you kind of would know you have a pot to draw from, which I don't want to say authorizes it, but says, okay, we were okay with what it was potentially going to fund. Because later, I know when it comes to us, it's going to say these were, in such and such approved budget. But I do think, especially with the building, we probably have to be a little more piecemeal to a degree. Now, on the other hand, I see what we got going on here, which there's certain things that, even if we're not even here for another year, give or take, they just have to be accomplished. So, and some of them are not that expensive. The server room situation, obviously you have to have the servers working. You can't have that overheating and all these other challenges. Air conditioning, we cannot be in this building without air conditioning, right? That's
Health and safety factor.
exactly.
Yeah.
The boiler, I think it sounds like you have no choice but to just get that thing fixed. The elevator might be, that's where do we just fix one elevator, have one operable? People obviously can utilize the stairwell as well as an elevator. So that might be one, because that's $500,000 potentially in the longer run, when again, we don't know what the deal is with the building in the long term and how much money we would want to put in it. So you see what I'm getting at. And then last but not least, the the IT CIP projects, which in here, I don't even know what that entails, but 737,000 this year and over $1 million in the full on. That might be something too, where we would want to understand better, like, what is that exactly affording us?
Do we have a table breaking down the IT projects?
You have a sheet here available for that takes a slightly deeper look at it, but it doesn't necessarily provide a list of what those projects are about. So that's something that we can
Come back with.
I see Margaret just.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. We do have a list that was provided to us that is in more details. Certainly, we can provide it to you.
Okay, thank you. So back to this, I don't think I have too many issues with a number of the numbers presented, although the elevators, that's a pretty expensive project, and I understand what Wendell said about availability, et cetera, but that's more of a judgment call, I do think, because, do we need 2 elevators or not? I know you have to have at least one, but I don't know beyond that, what the rules are, what the law is and such. And I don't want to spend $500,000, that may or may not be required, if you will. But back to this, but the main things I don't think we can't even nickel and dime on it, in the boiler, the air conditioning, et cetera. So anyway, I just wanted to get some clarification, but also knowing that even if we authorize kind of the overarching, there are chances where we can say, no, don't move forward with this, or let's hold up. Because last but not least, that's why we've had that discussion in the last meeting about why we're so, forced to find out what we want to do with our facilities options.
Oh, right,
It's
right.
really important, because this building, what's the value of it? What are we going to do with it? How much are we going to rehab in it? Where are we going to move along our staff? Because that's why we need to make some decisions later. So then we can also figure out, what do we have to do right now? So anyway, so thank you for the clarification.
This is Don. I'm reminded of Director Little was caught in an elevator. It got stuck, and we had to call a workman from the elevator company to come and get him out. So he was stuck in there for some time. I hope that doesn't happen to you, my colleagues.
I hope not.
Mhm.
That elevator's a little scary to ride in.
We know we can't cheap out on health and safety issues,
That's right.
and we will not, as long as I'm here.
Good. Should we
Okay,
go
so
on?
does that take us to our next section of the presentation?
Yes.
Yep.
I'm going to go over, included in the slide presentation, if we could move to page 48. I'm going to go, or 49, I'm going to go over one of the bridge project sheets. This sheet is different for the presentation. This sheet is different than what you have as your attachment to the agenda package, which is attachment B. There's a more comprehensive project sheet that's in there. But I just want to go over one of these project sheets as an example of the type of information that is available on the project sheet. And I can answer any questions on any of the projects or on the general information that's provided on the project sheet. Initially, what we're looking at is we've got the project number, okay, and the name of the project, okay. Additionally, at the top of the page, we show the total project cost. In this particular case, the JMM Carson expansion project total cost is $27 million approximately, and the dollar amount in the 5-year CIP for this project is about $16.5 billion. And also you have the dollar figure for fiscal year 22-23, which is again about $16.5 million. This project is expected to be completed in the next fiscal year. If we drop down to the line below that, it shows you what the expenditures have been for the prior years. Okay, and again, the total expenditures for the prior years for this particular project is about $10.6 million. And again, for fiscal year 22-23, the actual expenditures expected is about $16.5 million. Then we show the future or the 5-year plan, the dollars amount that will be spent in each one of the proposed 5-year CIP, and any dollar amount that is beyond the 5-year CIP. And again, we show the total cost of the project. Any questions on that particular aspect of this project sheet?
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Why not show the funding source? Am I missing something?
The fund, I'm gonna get to that,
Oh,
okay, later on the page. So below the initial table, you have the project description. It tells you what the project is about. Okay, and below that, we have the proposed or the benefits of doing this project. In this particular case, this project replaces an existing MF type system with a custom MF system, which will increase the capacity of the plant, and it will be able to deliver more product water to the customer. So over the years, it has declined. I believe it's somewhere close in the neighborhood of 3.5 million gallons per day. This new system will bring that capacity back up to 5.8 million gallons per day. And below the proposed benefits are your drivers. There has been some technological improvements in microfiltration. There's new type of membranes that are more effective with the changing water quality that the district receives from Hyperion. This new technology will better address it. Certainly the equipment age of the old system and the criticality of the process. Below that is your funding sources. In this case, we have 4 different categories. It is debt service of 15.1 million. Okay, and that is an asterisk on that says that this is partially funded by some low interest debt from the state revolving fund, or it is funded by low interest debt from the state revolving fund of about 15.1 million. Then with the same project, there is a grant from Proposition 1 of about $8.1 million. And then there's contribution from Cal Water of $4.0 million, as well as the customer and the agreement with the refinery that they will chip in $1.6 million for, as a part of the construction of this new capital asset. And then when we go to the right side of this particular sheet, it gives you the status of the project at its current state. And below that, we have a visual graphic of what is the anticipated schedule of this project for the upcoming fiscal year and beyond. Is there any questions on this particular project sheet? And we've included one for all 46 projects. Okay, and this is the abridged that's in the presentation, but the full project description, it includes actions by the board when the project was actually approved. Okay, it shows you on the end user, who is the end user. Additionally, there's a graphic here, and how does it meet the strategic goals of the district. So that information was left out for the presentation, but is also available as part of your attachment B in your document under the specific project sheets. This is a new feature of projects that are being produced by the district to be more transparent, to be more informative for both the boards and our constituents out there. And so, we're looking for feedback. Okay, and this kind of concludes our presentation. And if there's any questions that I can answer, or Barkat or Margaret can answer about the CIP program that's proposed for fiscal year 22-23, I'm willing to give a jab at providing you with some answers.
On this one,
Desi, go ahead.
with respect to the funding sources, there's an awful lot of asterisks. So on the debt side, is 100% of the debt going to the state revolving loan fund?
That's correct.
Okay, and that debt has been procured.
Correct.
So can we, instead of saying loan amount up to $15 million, can we actually say we have a loan, we give the specific state loan revolving, state loan agreement number, blah, blah, for $15 million?
Yeah, we can provide some additional information. Again, the state loan is dependent on what is the true cost of the project, and also the grant that's associated with this is also based on what is the true cost of the project. And so we won't know that until the project is actually completed. So it's up to 15.1 million, or it's up to 8.
But perhaps the agreement number would give the certainty that you're asking for.
Same thing, the Prop 1 grant, it's up to, and typically they will go over it. If you bring it in for less, they don't expect you to ask for reimbursement for the entire amount. But you can count on $8 million if that is what the grant is. If you read the Prop 1 grant, it will give you a number. So I'm looking for what is the number. Yes, if you bring it in under cost, then they get some of the benefit of that.
We can provide that information.
Okay, so just so that we know, because when I look, it's up to, is it financed or is it not? And then in terms of the Cal Water, are they going to reimburse the $4 million? Is that agreement done?
The agreement has not been finalized. No, the draft version of the agreements have been floating around. Cal Water committed to it a few years back, but not necessarily with ironclad agreement. They filed with the PUC, and we've been in discussions with them recently about Typically, when there's a contribution by the customer, there is an asset that is involved that the customer would be getting as part of the agreement. And we've been recently in discussions about what that asset would be. We've had some fruitful discussions, and we hope to get an agreement signed sooner than later for that.
So again, that is money that is not certain money that may or may not happen. We're hoping that it does. So when we show that that's 4 million there, it kind of shows that that's external funding. But what happens if it doesn't come through, or what happens if Cal Water comes back and says, you know, we're only going to honor 2 million because we never did execute the agreement prior to moving forward with the project, even though we're assuming that that funding is going to be there.
You're absolutely.
I would like to see that, because it leaves the district exposed. Let's say they come back at 2 million versus the 4 million. How are we going to plug that $2 million gap?
You're absolutely correct, Director Alvarez.
So.
And maybe if I may, Margaret, do we have the 4 million contribution for Cal Water included within our contribution forecast?
That is correct. That $4 million is included in our in our assumption from customers. So we would need to, to the example given by Director Alvarez, if it were to vary, we would need to then identify those shortfalls from that $4 million.
Okay, thank you for that.
And then similarly with the refinery has not committed to the $1.9 million. The understanding under previous discussions and or agreements, not quite sure, was that they may contribute up to 1.9 million. So
I can address, oh, sorry.
You can address that one.
If I can address that. So they had committed separate from this 1.9. So this project included other items which were going to be financed by refinery. This 1.9 actually has been paid. This is for past studies related to this project. It's actually $1.875 million, and we did build the refinery for them, and we did receive this money. I think what you're thinking about is related to the project. It was like a second part of the project, the TMBR portion of the project that was going to be funded by the refinery, and they had not commit to fund that project, and so we dropped that aspect of the project until they come back and commit to it. That's probably what the.
I just want to confirm that the $1.9 million or 1.875, which was for the past design and studies, that is money that's been received.
That is correct. We have received those funds.
Okay. So the only potential gap, but again, it goes, and it would be consistent to all other projects where similar questions come up regarding funding. If we don't have the money already in the bank from whatever funding source, or an agreement that says how that funding is going to come in, sometimes like with a Prop 1 grant, you bill them in arrears, you have to spend the money and show them that you spent it, and they reimburse you up to whatever the agreement amount is. But when we have some open-ended things, it would be good to know. I'm much more comfortable with knowing exactly how we're going to fund things as opposed to funding them on the come.
Okay, perhaps we can kind of comb through our project list and identify those open-ended items and provide a summary of what that might look like and how that relates to the forecast that has already been presented.
It's a good idea.
And Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make a comment. The only thing I was going to say, actually, Wendell, is I like the way these were set up and designed, way easier to read than obviously the more busy and dense one, which is that's for different purposes. But this is good, I think. So it's pretty clear, And actually, if you do look in them, you can kind of see what I was asking earlier, where you break it down a little bit. And if we need more details, we can get that. But these are pretty, I think they're pretty thorough, per project. So just want to say I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Excuse me, just don't go any smaller with the font.
That's what I mean. That's one way.
And I think that Wendell did a really good high-level overview of this format. But more importantly, there's other projects that are in the package. And if there's a particular project of interest, we can flip to that page, have the same kind of conversation that we just had, but for a different project of interest. I see that we're coming close to time. What time are we for this meeting?
Yeah, 3 minutes.
Okay. So we have 3 minutes, but
No,
if there.
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
As long as.
Okay, so my point being, if there are other projects of interest, we can turn to those pages and, extend the conversation to your interest.
I will go through this and pick one, but not today.
Okay, well, thank you for that feedback.
Let's press on.
I'll just, I guess I'll just ask a question and make a comment. So page 98, which is the other potential CIP projects, which on this, it's kind of running off the page. You can't see the whole thing, but I think this is something not maybe to talk about at this moment or today, but this is obviously in here, and this has to be kind of vetted with the board, obviously, right? Barkev at some point.
Correct.
We're going in the longer run.
So this is not part of the 5-year projection right now, but these are projects that have been identified in past planning studies. We did feasibility on some of these. And even the master planning, the 50,000 view of what's out there and all those demands out there that could potentially get on recycled water. But as you can see, there's significant amount of funding. This project list has been included in the Army Corps of Engineers, the agreement that we hope to get to, this next agreement with the Army Corps. Because if they do provide funding, maybe they become more feasible for the district to proceed with. And then we could, if the board at some point wishes to proceed with one of them and say, okay, this is one that maybe we can get some other stakeholder funding, a retail agency could be in, they might see the benefit of it, put in some contributions, then maybe we can bring it up and see if we want to proceed with any steps. But as of now, we won't be proceeding with this. The one exception to this one is that the groundwater augmentation project phase 1, phase 2, we did include in our technical planning budget some dollar amounts to look at the feasibility of that. Because though, the reason why it's the technical planning is because we don't know if we would proceed with it or not. So it could end up just being an expense. The decision hasn't been made. It's not part of the CIP. And so that's the only exception to this, to these projects over here, where in technical planning, we are doing some sort of planning level analysis for the groundwater augmentation project.
That's very it's internal mostly, right? With your own staff, it's not really a high dollar amount or expenditure.
It was, I'm trying to remember right now.
I believe it was staff time and about $250,000 for a consultant.
Thank you,
Or
Mark.
200,000, 200.
So I guess that's maybe my only feedback on these, and I'm glad that we talked about it for a minute, would be because some of these could end up being put into requests toward Army Corps of Engineer funding. But I have to say, personally, I think we would want to have that dialogue before we allowed that to happen. Because I don't think all these projects are probably going to be palatable going forward. And I don't want them getting on a list and going asking for money and, if we're just not going to move in that direction, number one, but number two, we don't need to put ourselves on a hook and or back out, etc. So for example, Kenneth Hahn, at this time, I just don't see that going anywhere. And I think the board has to have a real good discussion about that potential project, for example, and what's the future of our whole operation. So like, that's what I'm getting at. That one probably needs to eventually just come off this list. But I want to have the dialogue before we remove it, but I'm just saying. But I don't want us to go asking for money and then be like, well, we're not going to do this. So that's just me talking right now. And then the other one, I don't personally understand all the minutiae of each of these projects, so I think we'd have to know that too. Like, just off the top of my head, I don't know what the North Palos Verdes and the South Palos Verdes expansion are. I don't know what that is. I see there's significant money listed here. So I think this one is one coming out of our next, strategic planning and scoping, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to call this list, and decide what we would really be asking for in any of the funding authorizations, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a criticism, by the way. It's just I'm making sure I don't want anybody wasting more time on something if at the end of the day there's probably not a stomach for it. Whether it's at the board level, it's at the constituent level, it's even where's the future of technology going right now, right? I mean, why would we be building, long pipelines for maybe not that much water? One last thing, I do see your groundwater augmentation project obviously has some significant water listing right there, what that entails, and that makes a lot of sense to talk about. So anyway, let's just that one would be a future discussion at some point.
Focus discussion on these projects, where they are, what do they entail, what do they bring to the table?
Yeah, and just to say, hey, you know what? Where are we literally going to ever do that or not? Yeah. But it's so again, this is on the kind of your back burner list. I know, so but down the road. Okay. Thank you.
Well, this is what staff's supposed to do, is to ID future projects or possible projects for us as the board to then choose one and say, well, we want to do this. Now, that's not to say that we're going to do it, but we need to have something in front of us. So here's our wish list.
Yeah.
Of course, you can't work on anything without being given the authority to do so. If you're not spending any money, have fun.
Thank you, Director.
Okay, so perhaps President Deere, that brings us maybe to the conclusion of our presentation. If there aren't any further discussion or questions of the committee members or any else who may be present. And just as a matter of procedure, perhaps Board Secretary, we did have a question posed by the commenter at the beginning of the meeting. How is that typically handled?
I sent a private chat message, or actually it went out to everyone asking her to forward her contact information so that we could address that. So typically for public comment, we don't address it at the meeting, and then we follow up afterwards.
Okay, thank you for doing that. Okay, so President Deere, if it pleases you to move on to the next item, we can do so.
It certainly does. Let's do.
Okay, so with that said, that concludes our information calendar. I believe we have no closed session items for today's meeting. So that takes us to director's comment, future agenda items.
Any comments from my colleagues?
President Deere, I'll make a couple of comments.
Dr. Alvarez?
So we saw an awful lot of numbers, and I think Margaret spoke to it, but I really feel we need additional, maybe it's going to be more than one presentation on this. Maybe a need for a couple of workshops between now and adoption of the budget. But that is, in terms of moving forward, a real clear definition of if we have CIP that we're committing to above and beyond. As I see it right now, we only have about 3 or 4 CIP projects that are committed to, and that we're spending money and or will be spending money. We're spending the money that's already committed on the construction money on the expansion project at the Melinda McDonald plant. We will be moving forward with construction monies on the Palos Verdes recycled water project. And there was a couple of others that we mentioned that are of that nature. A lot of these other projects are more or less indeterminate at this time. They're primarily been in the feasibility realm as to identify the project, and some money's been spent that way. So the impact that it will have on our overall budget and how we finance these items is going to be really important. And I think that we need to step back and really look at where we're headed as a district. And then I would like to again reinforce here that continued investment in R&R projects at the Ed.C. Little plant are not in our best interest. We do not have a guaranteed water supply for the Ed.C. Little plant. And to continue to operate the plant the way it is, given the situation where we, and this is now the greater we, Southern California and California, we find ourselves with respect to water sources, that we need to really find alternative water sources. And I think that the best use of the Ed.C. Little plant would be as a regional facility where it produces 100% indirect or direct portable reuse water, that is advanced treated water. Right now, it does produce some. The water that goes primarily into the barriers is produced 100%. The recycled water that goes into the barriers is produced at the plant, and that is advanced treated water. The rest of the water that's produced there goes separate from the Chevron water that gets advanced treatment also, plus additional denitrification. The rest of that water is tertiary water, and if we're going to continue to operate that plant that way, I think we've tremendous loss of opportunity and not in the best interest of our communities or of the region. So we really need to rethink that, and we need to kind of back off just throwing money at an old plant that's pretty much at the end of its life. It was built in 1995. It's 25 years old. It is going to require a lot of reimbursement, but I think best if we step back and reposition that plant, and there would be some ancillary benefits that would come from it. In part would be the need to no longer or eliminate the need of having the terminal treatment plants for the refineries, because all of the water can be advanced treated at the Ed.C. Little plant and then just shipped straight down. So there's some other benefits and or changes in operations that we need to look at. So we've talked a lot about the need, or at least some of us have mentioned the need that we need to pivot. We're in a whole new world with respect to the water supply for California and for Southern California. And we need to really look at that as we anticipate making financial commitments. And those would also be very big dollars if we reposition that plant. I'm talking about $10 or $20 million. We're talking in the $500 million range. But then again, it would be producing not 20,000 or 30,000 acre feet of advanced treated water, but 60,000. So it makes a big difference, and would really be to the benefit of the entire region and the state of California. Thank you for allowing me to make those comments.
President Deere, we have a question from commentary from Director Williams.
Thank you very
Williams, go ahead.
much. Yes, I'd like to comment on Director Alvarez's, I guess you would call that a proposal, or
Yes.
that perhaps that's something we should pursue, because he said an awful lot and things are changing a lot with water in the Southern California region. And some of the things that we have talked about since I got on board back in 2000 and I think it was 15, that's we're no longer there anymore. And we almost never talked about DPR, and now it's the order of the day. So I think we should commission a study to look at what will be the future of our plant and our bread and butter, our legacy here coming in the coming years. And we should do that pretty quick, because regional water plant in Carson that's being operated by Met and the LA
Sanitation.
yes, that we should we'll really start looking at that really hard. And so I would be happy to have staff take a deep dive into this, and for the board for that to come before the board, so the board can put some money towards that, because we can listen to Director Alvarez's opinions forever. He won't stop them. So we ought to take advantage of what he's saying here. So can we staff come up with a proposal to put it together so that we can look at studying this thing?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
If that's the consensus of the board, of the quorum that we have today.
Actually, you don't need but one person to say it, and then it comes to the board.
The director can make a request.
Yeah.
There we go.
All right. But now if we ask you to spend money, that'd be different, but we're just asking you to put the thing together now and see.
To make a
if it makes
proposal
sense.
that we can look at.
Right.
Right. Understood. Thank you for that request.
Okay.
And we will follow up with an item for the board to consider.
Yes.
The president, I'll just really quick, I echo both of what my colleagues have said, because I think it gets back to sort of what I was talking about too on that list, is that we're obviously in the midst of this budget talks right now for the next fiscal year, let alone, your 3 years, your 5 years plan. But yet at the same time, this is what we have been talking about for a while, as we were trying to get, a new general manager in position, because the board has got to really rescope everything, the new strategic vision, the new, thinking of where we're at, a new trajectory. And while we've got to look at spending a certain amount of money in the short term, with some long-term ramifications, and I think Director Alvarez has some really great thoughts and ideas for that long-term vision, and we got to figure out what realistically we can look at and fund and get accomplished. But there's that combo of the maintenance and keeping things going and meeting our customer needs while we're pivoting to the long-term, role of the Ed C. Little plant and our other facilities, and working with our neighboring partners. So all that long-winded thing to say is, no, this is why I really want us to also caution us not to, we've got to authorize certain spending now and some longer-term spending thoughts, but we don't want to put the cart before the horse, because we just like spending money in this building. We don't know what the future of the building is. So this is why it's really critical, in the next handful of months, we've got to have some sort of the board retreat or a workshop or something, so we can really get a better understanding this calendar year, and start moving along in that different direction. You know, so that's obviously the president has to work with the general manager to figure the schedule out, but we just can't wait much longer. I mean, right now we've got to approve a budget. I get it, but so I think the idea of a proposal that was just suggested, Greg, is good. But at the same time, we also, you know, we just all need to sit down and have a dialogue that we have, as a public agency, a public forum, you know, dealing with the Brown Act, et cetera, rescoping. Because I just don't want to, I don't want to get caught up in spending money, you know, 2, 3, 5 years out when we're like, oh, that at this point, it doesn't matter anymore. We just blew 2 or 3 or 500,000 or $1 million on something. So hence, same story. You know, why would we go build that Kenneth Hahn pipe? We're not going to probably do that. There might be some little things here and there we look at, but ultimately we're rescoping. So anyway, you know, he already heard me talk about all this to him on one-on-one. But we've got to really have our time to meet collectively as a board, and we need help and direction and vision to make things come to fruition. So anyway, that's that. And one last thing I did want to say, back to, I know thank you for taking care of the Ms. Vargas, her comments. And I would echo actually what she said. I would love it if hopefully the customer agency workshop information would be available about a week before the meeting. If that's possible, I have no idea, but I think that would be fair to our retailers, customers, as well as to board members. So to the best of you guys' ability, I'm just echoing what I think she said. That would be really good. I don't know if that's feasible or not, but.
I know that staff is working on that, and then also I guess it would help to know if the board plans to participate. In previous years, we did not have a special board meeting, we just had a customer agency workshop, but if there is going to be board participation, then I would need to post as a special board agenda.
You know, let me opine for 1 minute, because I remember the way that we used to do it, I thought years ago, but I could be wrong, was it was posted as a special just in case directors wanted to show up. But then you'd have to have a quorum, at least 3 of us, to make that work or not. I don't remember. Directors could always come, but you're right.
Actually engage in the, you know.
Oh, I get it. We could
make
just
comments, it's just that you cannot take any action.
Okay. Oh,
So
in that case, I don't know if we have to. We always can make, so I don't know if we have to take action or not, but okay. But I mean, I think for those of us who are available, we might come here or on Zoom or what have you, but okay.
A hybrid meeting.
But for what it's worth, I think it would be good if hopefully they get the information, you know, in a time enough that they can look at it and be prepared to participate in the meeting.
And we're talking about the workshop that's set for the 27th?
28th, it's
The 28th.
next Thursday.
Okay, so we're right about a week away right
Okay.
now.
Next Thursday too.
Say that again?
The customer agency.
That's the customer
workshop
agency
is
workshop.
next-
Oh, so we're already hitting that deadline.
We're at a week right now.
But even if you could then maybe get it, I don't know if it's available by Monday.
Yeah, my conversation with staff was to let's actually, I'm thinking of the long range, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's the 28th, and Margaret is online. Margaret, did you want to weigh in or make any comments about the content of the information that would be available?
Absolutely. So I have shared the draft presentation with Greg as someone who's just been on the job a little over a week now. I know he needs to get up to speed on all of our past conversations on the workshops, but and so I can work with him certainly to expedite getting that out. And then there is another workshop scheduled on April 27th. That is another board workshop. This one specifically to focus in on the long-range financial plan. So again, just a beginning of the conversation. Again, the comments made by the board here about the strategic direction of the board certainly can play into it, but it's to focus in on the financial side of it. And again, you know, if the projects are different and how we change that, of course, that will change, you know, the long-term view of it. But based off of what you heard today, what you heard in the previous workshops, that's what the focus will be for the workshop on the long-range financial plan, which is next Wednesday. And then we do have another one, the customer agency workshop on the 28th.
28th. Okay. Okay. Got it.
Okay, so we'll expedite getting the agency workshop presentation out ASAP. So thank you, Margaret, for clarifying where that is, and certainly I'll do my part to get that out.
Great. Thank you.
President Deere, if I could have 1 more minute. I forgot
Sure,
one
go ahead.
thing I want, a request. I would like, at least for my comments, with respect to certain items that we discussed earlier, and we said we wanted clarification and brought it back. I want those noted for the record.
You want them transcribed then?
What's that?
Yeah.
You want everything you said to be transcribed and put in in the minutes?
Not everything. There's a way to summarize minutes so that we don't have to go back and view the videotapes to say, I think we asked for that information 6 months ago.
Okay, but I think you're asking for those items that were asking for clarification and follow-up. Those are the items that are for the record. Okay, and I know we've captured action items along the way. So there's quite a few of those.
Yes, there are.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, we'll put them in the record then. Is there anything else? I
So
guess,
I think that's,
I guess there's no one else that wants to speak up, so we'll have an adjournment. Is that okay?
Yes. That's fine.
No,
Okay,
Director Williams says no.
okay, well, then I'm gonna go contrary to his advice as usual. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay.
thank you. Thank you to staff. Thank you in particular to Barkev, Wendell, and Margaret. I appreciate all of the hard work that you guys put together in making